I have greetings for all of you from Luxembourg, from my home country. Luxembourg, a teeny country in Western Europe, was liberated twice by American forces, and Luxembourg is also the final resting place of your and our national hero, General George Smith Patton Jr., who's buried in Luxembourg. But I first also would like to salute all the veterans, all the men and the women of the greatest generation that brought back liberty to my home country. Without their commitment and their answer to the call of duty, I would not be here tonight. Thank you very much. So it's a great honor and pleasure for me to be with all of you tonight, gathered around this table as part of the National World War II Museum sponsored international conference on World War II, and more specifically the Memory Hall Experience, where World War II participants, veterans, and witnesses share their personal experience that marked them forever as a living history lesson and as a legacy for the future generations. I am very privileged to participate in this roundtable discussion as a member of the post-World War II generation. Again, my name is Roland Gall. I'm a Luxembourg citizen, and but the country was again liberated in September 44 and subsequently thereafter during the Battle of the Bulge in December 44 and January 45. And personally, I am the founder and curator of the National Museum of Military History in Diekirch, Luxembourg, where this chapter of history is preserved in a balanced and lively way as a reminder of the past and as a prominent and lasting tribute to our American and Allied liberators. At the same time, the museum is also a platform of reconciliation between nations that were facing each other more than 60 years ago. Our museum, which has a privileged relationship with the National World War II Museum for a few years, relies as a great deal on oral history accounts and on interviews made with American, Allied, and German veterans, as well as from local civilians, as they represent a precious wealth of very detailed and accurate information, of personal striking stories, and as a legacy of the human dimension of a bygone worldwide conflict for mankind, of a past we all share. Remembrance is important as it nurtures people's and nations' awareness of a collective memory. So the National World War II Museum is aware of this fact and must be congratulated by the international community for this outstanding initiative to sponsor and host this international conference in an effort to bring together key speakers and historians to reflect on the World War II experience. Along that line, I'm very honored to introduce you tonight the following distinguished participants of this roundtable, where we have with us, if you permit ladies first, Mrs. Margaret Ringenberg, a former WASP or Women's Air Force Service pilot, Mrs. Carmen Bozak, a former Women's Army Auxiliary Corps who encoded teletype messages for the battlefield. Then we have Mr. Walter Ehlers, Congressional Medal of Honor winner, who served, amongst others, units with the 1st U.S. Infantry Division, the Big Red One, in several theaters of operation, and Captain Joachim Wedekind, former German merchant mariner, who had to support Hitler's war effort. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. It's a true pleasure for me indeed to be here with you. Before we're discussing tonight's key topic, air, sea, and land, may I suggest everyone to briefly introduce her or himself with a narrative and a respective career with the armed forces, as well as perhaps key missions and events. Thank you, and may I start then with Mrs. Ringenberg, please.
Well, thank you. I'm Margaret Ringenberg, and I had the privilege of being a WASP, Women's Air Force Service pilot, in World War II. Now, this museum is not only a place for future generations, but it's a wonderful place for people like myself to come and see. I remember those good old days. During the buildup of the war, I was living with my mom and dad and 2 sisters on a farm in northern Indiana. I was trying to decide what I would do when I graduated from high school. Now, I could be a teacher, a nurse, wait tables, or get married, but I was fascinated with airplanes. I decided I would be a stewardess because I knew that girls can't be pilots. I thought the word pilot meant boy or man. I also thought the word veteran meant a boy or man that had fought overseas, and I'm still struggling when they ask people in a group, the veterans, to stand. I'm not sure that I'm supposed to stand. Then I thought, what if something would happen to the pilot while I was serving as a stewardess? I better take a few flying lessons, and this is how it started. I started flying when I was 19 years old, and I loved it. I got my private license when I was 20. I could never have imagined the places that license would take me. Then when I was 21, I got an invitation to become a WASP, a telegram from the government saying my service was needed in the Women's Air Force Service Pilot. Now, we transported airplanes in the United States during World War II. Some of the girls ferried, did some other works like towing targets or teaching or many other occupations. I had many exciting days testing and ferrying airplanes and delivering them to people in the United States as a military pilot. Then I got new orders. WASP were no longer needed. I was to remove all insignia on December the 20th, 1944. I came home to Fort Wayne with a single and multi-engine commercial license and a real sense of sadness. I boxed up my uniform and wings and put them away in the attic. I didn't talk about the experience for several years because I was so offended. But I signed up for the reserve in case there was another war. Now, I worked at the airport and got my instructor's rating in March of '45, and I still have my instructor's rating and still flying. I started flying for Pierce Flying Service, where I had learned to fly. But who wants to fly with a girl pilot? I had more time and experience than any other instructor, but I was a girl. It took time to be accepted, and I had to be patient. Eventually, my appointment book was full. In October of '46, I married Morris Ringenberg. He was from the same church I had gone to and had served in the Army Air Corps of Engineers and had the Purple Heart. We started our family, but I still managed to instruct and fly the Powder Puff Derby each year. Suddenly, I was 40. It seemed so old. Could I continue to fly? Brownies, Girl Scouting, and being a high school band mom soon filled my days. But I squeezed in flying the Powder Puff Derby and the Air Race Classic, plus doing some instructing in corporate flying. I then became the grandmother of 5 awesome grandchildren and became a school career day speaker. Before I knew it, I was 60. Now it's really getting trickier. It was hard to get insurance to be a chief pilot for a corporation because of my age. Life took a different twist. I ventured out internationally for the first time when I picked up an airplane in Australia in 1993 and brought it to the United States. Then in '94, I piloted in a round-the-world air race with an all-woman team. After that, I was featured in Tom Broka's book, The Greatest Generation, and wrote my own book, Girls Can't Be Pilots. My speaking opportunities challenged me too, as I was invited to address the cadets at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Then in March of 2001, I was privileged to be part of the Skytracker team in a London to Sydney air race. All 10 of my members were able to spend the weekend in London to see me off. Our team had many adventures, including an aircraft controller saying, "X-ray Papa Kilo, correct your track immediately or you'll be fired on." And now that was not us, it was another team. In this race, we flew 63 hours through 17 countries with 28 stops along the historic Kangaroo Route. It was an amazing adventure, And I would like to add, although it's required that all aircraft controllers speak the universal aircraft language, English, it's not necessarily that they're understandable. That same year, I flew the Air Race Classic with my grandson, so now all 5 of my grandchildren have trophies with their grandmother. In June of 2001, my daughter and I flew the Air Race Classic coast-to-coast race and placed top 10. In 2002, I was invited to the Johnson Space Center, where I spoke for the astronauts that led me to be placed on the astronauts speaking list. While there, I got to fly the shuttle simulator and work the retrieval arm, and the hardest thing was getting into the thing. Then in June of 2003, I flew the Air Race Classic in a coast-to-coast race that ended up over Kitty Hawk. My co-pilot and I took second place. Then in April of 2004, I got to ride in an Indy car and go 180 miles an hour. That was not for me. You know, they had Make-A-Wish for children. They have now a Make-A-Wish for seniors. When is one supposed to slow down? I have passed the big 8-5. Morris and I were married for over 56 years when I lost my biggest fan. I am now doing the grandmother thing. I still have the privilege of sharing my story with audiences several times a week. I do a lot of speaking at schools. Schools need our attention. I can hardly wait to see what the next 20 years will bring. You see, World War II not only changed the world, it changed many of our lives. Thank you.
May we now turn to Mrs. Carmen Bozak, please?
So I make this up there? No. Good afternoon. I'm Carmen Bozak. I was born in Puerto Rico. I went to school in New York City, and I was working for the War Department in Washington, D.C. when war broke out in December of 1941. As soon as the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was established in 1942, I decided to join, not just to get away from a very boring job I had as a clerk typist in the payroll department of the Corps of Engineers, but because there was such hype about patriotism that everyone wanted to get involved. That I did, and 3 months later, I was on a train to a very cold place, Des Moines, Iowa, for my basic training. Not long after that, in January of 1943, I was on a troop ship for parts unknown. Upon crossing the Straits of Gibraltar, it was evident that we were headed for the North African Theater of Operations. During the first 3 months in Algiers, I experienced 4 German air raids, the 4th being the worst, for it landed just a few blocks from General Eisenhower headquarters, where I worked with the Signal Corps as a teletype operator. We would send coded messages to the front Tunisia and to General Montgomery's, and the war was still very active there in those days. Most of the messages were in code, so we don't know what we were sending. But it was interesting. We would use British teletype machines that would receive and send messages at the same time. During the 17 months that I spent in Algiers, North Africa, I was billeted in a convent, in a museum, in an apartment building across the street from the St. George Hotel, where General Eisenhower would meet all the WWIIs who were working at the St. George Hotel with a good morning, corporal, good morning, sergeant, whatever the case may be. After I left Algiers, I went to work also as a type operator, teletype operator in Caserta, Italy. We were working in a castle, and we were billeted in a Canadian hospital. By now, it was time to come home on rotation or on points. The timing was perfect, for in July 1945, I met the man who was destined to be my husband. Master Sergeant Ted Bozak had been seriously injured in Germany with the 30th Infantry Division, and he was a patient at Valley Forge General Hospital outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. I had contracted an infection in my left eye, and I also was a patient there. In 1961, the Bozaks, all 5 of us, relocated in Florida. And in 1991, the old infantry sergeant passed away. I organized the WWII chapter in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 16 years ago. And I also organized the Society of Military Widows. I belong to every service organization there is. My husband used to call me the flag waver. And I've been doing volunteer work at the Oakland Park Outpatient Clinic for 18 years. And I've been a member of the National WWII Vets Organization. I was a member of the National Honor Guard, and I just received my 25-year certificate, and I figure, well, it's time to retire because I have a bad knee and I cannot stand for long periods of time. I feel that I did my part, I contributed, I did the best I could, and here I am. Thank you.
May we now turn to Mr. Walter Ehlers, Congressional Medal of Honor winner.
Good evening, folks. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay from here? Well, I'll stay here then. My brother and I knew all about what was happening over in Germany because we had been reading about it. And of course, I had grandparents who actually came from Germany, and they told us that there was going to be another war with Germany. And so when the United States starts getting excited about, we didn't want to go into war. We were going to stay out of it, but we could see that it wasn't going to happen that way because the Germans were getting very much brave. They came out and they were even sinking our shipping off of the coast of the United States of America and things like this before the war even started. And so in 1940, the government's getting excited, they decided, well, they better start a selective service system and start building up their military because they were going to be expecting a war very soon. And my brother didn't want to be drafted. He wanted to go and volunteer. So I said, well, I want to volunteer with you. So we both went down to the Fort Riley, Kansas, and volunteered for military service. And they told me and said, well, you're only 19 years old and you got to have your parents' signature. So I went back home to get my parents' signature, and my dad said he would sign. My mother looked me straight in the eye and she said, son, she says, I'll only sign on one condition, that you promise to be a Christian soldier. And she said that with tears in her eyes. Well, I told her I would do my best. And so I joined. And I had many times when I was very tempted to do things I knew that I shouldn't do. And I knew that if I did, that she would be very unhappy with me. And I didn't want to dishonor her. And above all, I didn't want to dishonor God. So that's the way I lived my life throughout my military service. And so when I got into the military service, I thought, well, you know, what am I really doing here? When I first went in, I'm glad I had my brother with me, because I'd have probably went home AWOL or something like that, because we enlisted in an outfit that was supposed to be mechanized, but when we got there, they weren't mechanized. We walked and we walked, and we were laying out there in the dust and dirt and everything, and it was just miserable training. And a lot of the guys got the flu at that time. This was in early 1940 or late 1940, and my brother got the flu, and it was just a miserable time. And I was just about ready to go over the hill, but my brother encouraged me not to. So anyway, I'm glad he kept me in. But we had all of our jiu-jitsu training and all this stuff, amphibious training, jungle training and everything, and they put us in khaki uniforms and all this stuff. We went down to Camp Pendleton, which is a Marine base off of California coast, and we did our amphibious landings and so forth. And they brought us back up to Fort Ord, California. They put us on a train, and they sent us clear across the United States in khaki uniforms. And we thought that we were training to go to the Pacific. Well, we got Camp Pickett, Virginia. First thing they did, they put us in uniforms, OD uniforms. They were all impregnated. They said they had to be impregnated because they were afraid that the next enemy we met, or the enemy that we meet over in seas, would have gas, and so they wanted to make sure that we weren't going to get burned by the gas. And then we went overseas in a ship called the USS Henry. Got close to they gave us French translation books. Well, we're kind of naive. We looked at, we thought we were going to France. We had French translation books. But we got off of the coast of Africa, and they finally told us we were going to French Morocco. That's how we found out there was another country that spoke French besides France. And so when we got there, we were in for the shock of our life. We felt like we went back about 500 years when we got off of that boat. And of course, we were under fire and all that kind of stuff. But when we got up into the land there, my golly, we saw Arabs out there with plows, wooden plows, and horses pulling them, and a guy leading them, and they were all cutting the dirt about so deep, and we felt like we'd went back 500 years. The country was so far backward, we wondered what in the world we were doing over there. And we had enough desert here, and when we started fighting across the deserts of Africa, we thought, we got more desert than this in California, but then we had to go fight for it. And actually, we were at the Casablanca conference, and I was supposed to be an honor guard there. My brother and I happened to be in the same unit at that time, and we were the honor guard, and President Roosevelt's coming down the street. He's looking at the soldiers on both sides, and he says, "These are mighty fine-looking soldiers and make good replacements for the 1st Infantry Division." So we got transferred to the 1st Infantry Division, and we ended up there in North Africa with the 1st Division, and we got into a big firefight. Now, talking about what my mother had told me about Christianity, I might tell you that I had a friend who, you know, when I first went in, like I said, I was kind of naive. I didn't know people very well. And when he first went in, I thought I hated him or something, but then I found out, well, my mother told me if I hated him, she'd wash my mouth out with soap, so I figured I better stop that. But I became very good friends with him, but I asked him to go to church with me, and he said, well, I'm an atheist. And I said, well, that's okay, you can go to church with me. So he went to church with me and came out, and he said, I'm still an atheist. I said, well, you can be anything you want to be. And I said, that's fine. When we got to Africa, while we were out there, and we're up on a hill there, and we're digging in, and he's got his old trench shovel, and he's going there, and he's going, he's just hitting the dirt like this, and he said, "Oh God, help me! Oh God, help me!" I said to Pete, I said afterwards, Pete, didn't you tell me you were an atheist? He says, I am an atheist. Well, I said, well, how come you were asking God to help you? He said, there was no one else to ask to help me. So I found out real early in my life in the military service that really there's a lot of people that believed in Christianity. They just didn't know it until it came to the real test of their willpower and everything like that. They needed the extra help, and they did ask God for it. And so I find that most of our soldiers are very Christian, and we were fighting for God and country. Now, when we got to, my brother got wounded in Sicily. I'm going kind of fast, got to go cover a lot of land here. He got wounded and medevaced back to Africa, and of course I finished up the war in Sicily and went with my division around to England, and we got into England, and there in England we had all this more amphibious training and everything, and my brother rejoined us in November of 1943, and then we've had all this amphibious training there. We got prepared, and in March of 1944, they separated us. Because of the Sullivan Brother incident in the Pacific, they decided they had to separate all brothers who were going into battle where they expected heavy casualties. And the company commander called us in and said, there's 3 things I got to tell you. One is we expect about 50% casualties on our next invasion. Well, we just figured he was estimating, because he had to estimate something. And he said, you only have $5,000 insurance. We should increase it. So we increased it to the maximum, which then was $10,000. We got our insurance, and then we were separated. I went to Company L, and I had all new men. And I had to train them. I didn't know any of them in the company. So I was really kind of a loner there, but I got the guys trained. Then we got ready to go down to Weymouth, where we were going to disembark from in England there. And when we got out there and we were going across the fields, we saw so many tanks, so many trucks, and so many vehicles. We never knew that our country had so much during the war, had made so many vehicles, because we were starving for them over in Africa and Sicily. We could hardly get any new vehicles of any kind, or guns either. And when we got there, they had all kinds of it. And out in the warehouses when we got there, they were stuffed full of logistical supplies for the invasion of Normandy. And then we were put on boats. We had a talk by Eisenhower there, who explained to us that this was going to be a pretty heavy maneuver here and so forth. And then that was the last time that I had a chance to talk to my brother. And we got on our boats, and he went on his company boat, and I went on mine. We were on LCIs, which were called landing craft infantry, and it had 200 men on them. And this boat did not go in the first wave because it had 200 men, and they had to have the beaches cleared, because if you hit that boat, you knock out about 200 men at a time. So anyway, the first wave got pinned down. We didn't know that was going to happen, and when we were going over there, we were out there in the water following them, and then we had to wait for our turn to go in, and we got the word that the first wave got pinned down on the beach. Well, they brought back Higgins boats, and my squad got called off to be one of the troops that was going to be sent in to join the first wave. So we were taken off of the second wave boat, and we put on the Higgins boat, and we went in and landed just like the first wave, except we weren't prepared for the chaos that we saw on the beach. It was just absolutely horrendous. If you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, it was about 60 times worse than what you've seen in Saving Private Ryan, because there was so many casualties, so much equipment and stuff laying on the beach, and men. It was just unbelievable to see. And when my squad and I ran, our boat stopped in the water out there. The ramp goes down, we're out there, and there's about 100 yards of water ahead of us. And I said, "This is as far as we're going?" He said, "Yes." And they let the ramp down. We go out the front of it, and I go into water up to my neck. I thought, this is a funny boat, but it couldn't go in far up to the beach. But anyway, we got up to on the beach, and the first thing my men wanted to do was to dig in, but there was a lieutenant up there who's directing traffic, and I heard that I was supposed to go in and take a reconnaissance of Triviers. My squad was supposed to do a reconnaissance patrol at Triviers, which was about 6 miles inland. Well, here we are on the beach amongst all these people who were laying around there dead, and were being fired upon and everything like this. And I said to the lieutenant, I said, "What direction we go from here?" He was directing traffic, and he said, "Well, follow that path. If you go to the right or left of it, you'll step on mines." Well, I believed him, because I saw these people laying right and left of these paths, but we followed the path. We got up there was a last row of wire there that hadn't been blown, so we pulled the 2 Bangalore torpedo men there who had blown the previous wire, and I said, "Well, we've got to get out of here." And so I asked they asked them to blow the wire for us. They said, "We can't. We move. Every time we move, we get shot at by the sniper." And so I said, "Where is it coming from?" And they pointed in a general direction. So I said, "Well, we'll lay down a field of fire." So we did. We were firing up there in the hills, and the guys got up to move to blow the wire. They got the torpedo under the wire. One guy got killed going up to it, and the other one, they had him pinned down all right, but he got killed. The other one did get the wire blown. We don't know what happened to him, because he blew the wire, and as soon as they blew it, I rushed my squad through it. We got up on the other side of the wire, and there weren't any more mines, but we got up into the trenches with the Germans. And the first day there, we captured 4 Germans and sent them down for interrogation. And the rest that we couldn't capture, they either got away from us or they got killed. And we captured the pillbox from the rear. We kept on fighting. We got into the hedgerows later. And on the 9th, on the 7th of June, night of the 7th, we had a patrol. We had a perimeter out there. We put up a defense perimeter, and we had to have a rest. And so we're just laying there, and all of a sudden, this firing goes on, and the German patrol ran into our perimeter. But we couldn't fire them after they got into the perimeter. We had to let them go. And so they wanted somebody to follow them out. Well, my squad got the job. I don't know how that happened, but we got the job. And we followed out. And we were going down this road, and it was dark, pitch dark. We couldn't see. And but we did stumble upon a briefcase that a guy was apparently carrying when he went in there. And it was, we picked it up and brought it back. I said, "We can't go any further. We can't see where we're going. We don't know where we're going." And we went back to the CP. They opened it up. They found the 2nd and 3rd lines of defense. The Germans were going to retreat to when they retreated from the trenches from the beachhead. So next day, next day we did a lot of fighting. The next day was on the 9th and 10th is for the action for which I received my Medal of Honor. And on that day, we had a platoon in one field going up here, and they got fired upon, and we hadn't gotten fired on our side yet, but so I didn't want to get caught out in the middle of the field with my men, so I rushed them all up to the hedgerow in front of us so we'd have some kind of protection. And then I was the leader of the squad. I always led my men because none of them had battle experience before. And besides that, I could smell the Germans before I could see them anyway. And so I took the lead, I went down there, and I was going up along the hedgerow, and suddenly I heard this noise on the other side, and I ran up on the hedgerow, and here's 4 Germans with their guns pointed at me, and there's a machine gun firing up in the corner. Now I had to make a quick decision whether I was going to shoot them, capture them, or something. Well, I knew I couldn't capture them because they would have shot me. So they had to drop on me, but I had to drop on them too, but I pulled my triggers faster. So I killed the 4 men, and I went up the hedgerow and ran out of the hedgerow onto the top of a machine gun nest and knocked it out. Went up the hedgerow further on, and then there was another machine gun firing. And we did the same thing essentially, except that I had my men all fix their bayonets when I was that close to those men. They were about from here to this first row in front of me when I shot them. And and when an M1 rifle, when that clip goes out, you got to reload it. And if they started to charge you or something, you might not get the thing reloaded, so you have to be ready for them. So I had them to fix their bayonets so they would be ready in case they ran out of ammo. And then when we got up there, when we knocked out the next machine gun nest, I ran up on the remote hill there. It was kind of where they'd cleared something off there, and I didn't know what it was for, but lo and behold, on the other side, in a deflated area there was 2 big mortar positions going into place. Well, they were in place. They had been firing them, and there were 12 men with them. And they looked at us, and their eyes got big, and they got scared. Well, we were scared too. We didn't know what the heck to do, but we asked them to halt. They wouldn't halt, so we had to start shooting, and we knocked out the German section there. And that was that day. And then on the 10th of June, we got involved in another hedgerow thing, doing the same thing practically, going up along the hedgerow. When they attacked us from 3 sides, there was the hill, the field on that side over there, and the field on that side, both in the front. And the company commander told us to withdraw. So I told my men, I said, well, we can't do that. If we turn our backs on them, they'll shoot us all in the back. So I went up on the mound, and I said, we'll fire cover for you too, so you can withdraw while we fire on the enemy. So my automatic rifleman came up with me, and he was firing on around to the right, and I was firing to the left. And we kept them pinned down. The rest of the squad got behind us, got back. 1 man got killed up in the hedgerow. As we were going back, I saw him putting a machine gun down there, and so I'm firing on it, and I got hit in the back from some guy behind me, like I thought would happen in the first place. And it spun me around, and I saw a German up there. I was falling down with port arms, and I just shot him. And then I got up, and I saw my BAR man laying up there on the field, so I ran up and I got him. He had been hit in the leg, the right leg and the right arm, and he couldn't use it. And so I had to get him up and put his arm over my shoulder and carry him back to the hedgerow behind me. Then I went back and got his rifle. And that's the way that was the action for which I received the Medal of Honor, but I didn't get it for that day. You don't get them right away out in the field. I didn't know I was going to get a Medal of Honor for any of that action. But I refused to have when I got back, I refused to have my wound dressed. They looked at my pack and they said, my company commander, when they were loading the riflemen on the ambulance, I said, well, you better have the medics check my wound in my back. So they took off my pack, and they found where a bullet hit my back and went into my muscle and out and into my pack, hit a bar of soap, went through my mother's picture in the back there, the side of it anyway, and came out my trench shovel. When the officer turned me around, he said, my God, you should be dead. You've been shot clear through. I said, oh, no. So they took it off. That's what they found. And then I refused to be medevac. I got my bandoliers, kept on fighting, and I got wounded again later. Then I went to Cherbourg Hospital, got wounded again later, went up to Hurricane Force, and I got wounded up there. I was after we fought in Belgium, and then we were in Germany. And I got wounded at the Hurricane Force, and I came back that was in October, and I came back in November. And I was reading in the Stars and Stripes. A friend on the train was reading the Stars and Stripes. He says, "Hey, Ehlers, I'm reading here where your brother got the Medal of Honor." And I said, "Yeah, I'm reading that too," but I didn't tell him he was reading about me because I hadn't gotten it yet. And so, besides, my brother got killed on D-Day on the second wave when he came in on that LCI. But anyway, when I got back to the CP, I got off of the train. I was going up to CP, and a colonel called me by my last name. He said, "Sergeant Ehlers, what are you doing here?" I said, "Sir, I am reporting back to duty." He says, "Well, you're supposed to be back in the United States getting the Medal of Honor from the President." And I said, "Yes, sir. I read about it in the Stars and Stripes." That's how I found out I was going to get it. Well, the Battle of the Bulge started. The Battle of the Bulge started on the 16th. And I had already been promoted to a second lieutenant on the 9th of June, or 9th of December, rather. And I got a battlefield commission, and General Hubner gave it to me for being so nice to his press. Anyway, he told me I qualified. I told him I didn't. I didn't think I did, but when he said I did, well, I had to accept. And then they called me out on the night of the 16th, I think it was, something like that. And they said, "Lieutenant Ehlers," they called me at 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, they're getting me out of bed. They said, "We got to get you out of here." I said, "What's the big hurry?" They said, "Well, the Germans have landed troops behind our lines, and they are also infiltrating our lines with Germans in American uniforms speaking perfect English. And we want to get you back to Paris to get your Medal of Honor before you get killed." I said, "Well, that's all right with me." So I did. I went back, and they told me when I got back to Paris that, "Well, we're going to send you home for 30 days, not because you have the Medal of Honor, but because you have more points than anybody in the division had." Well, I figured that's not so either, but I went home because I had the medal. But anyway, I did go home for 30 days. I came back, I rejoined them, and I was with them and fought through Remagen Bridgehead and went on later on. Got wounded again in April 1945, but I made it to the end of the war, and we met the Russians in Czechoslovakia. That's
Great.
the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Ehlers, for that fairly complete account. And our next panelist is Captain Joachim Wedekind, former German civilian Navy.
Okay, I have the difficult task of talking about something non-military, civilian. This is about German merchant marine in service for the Navy throughout the war. I started my career at 15 years of age on a square rigger, on one of these old sailing ships that grew all over the world without engines. And then the war started in 1939, and at the beginning of 1940, the Navy started to set up special offices just strictly for military supplies, the so-called troop transport ships. And we went all over Europe. I wanted to do this with a map, but I couldn't get that set up that way in order to show the places where we had to do that. It started with Norway. In April 1940, we occupied Norway, and in the, okay, I have to start to explain how this works. These were normal freighters, any tonnage from 4,000 to above any kind of tonnage. And they had not like nowadays where everything goes in containers. We had breakbulk cargo ships, steamships mostly, either diesel or coal ships still. And they had just ordinary cargo hatches. They were prepared for taking ammunition, tanks, gasoline in the holds, and all kind of equipment. And in the case of Norway, we had horses on board. On deck, on the upper tween deck and on deck, we had soldiers and also equipment. And in the case of Norway action, we started out of Hamburg, fully loaded with military equipment and the soldiers on board. And we entered the Oslo Fjord on 14th of April, 40. At that time, in front of us was a convoy which included a German cruiser, Blücher, and it was sunk about 6 days before we arrived up there. We got a torpedo, and we were lucky enough to set the ship on a rock. But then the problem was to get the soldiers off and the equipment, and unfortunately the 52 horses we had on board. And so that was the first experience. And then after a while, I went with a freighter to North Sweden, to Luleå, and Leningrad. That was a time when Germany had not entered Russia yet. And when I came back from Leningrad, the Navy sent me to France. This was in August 1940, and it was we didn't know what it was all about. The ships in Saint-Nazaire and Le Havre were prepared to be troop transports. And the whole operation was named Sea Lion. And it was supposed to be an invasion of England. And in fact, we were all out fully loaded with all kinds of ships and smaller, larger ships. And we were ready to get the convoys together. And the several warships came along as protective ships for the convoy. And then all of a sudden, it was canceled, and we went back to port and unloaded everything. And that was the time when Hitler had decided not to invade England. From there, I went to the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean theater was mainly for troop transports to supply the Africa Corps from several Italian ports, mainly Sicily, Napoli, several ports on the East Coast. And same thing. We were loading tanks, ammunition, all kind of military equipment, and soldiers. And we always felt sorry for them because most of the soldiers had never seen a ship in their life. And then we got out, and it was the whole thing was blockade running. Because you have to visualize Italy in the North African theater in the south, and the British coming with their convoys from Gibraltar, west-east to go to Cairo and Alexandria. Their convoys were comprised of something like 40, 50 ships, battleships, cruisers, and we had Italian smaller warships as protection, and we were going north-south, maybe with 8 or 10 ships or something. Sometimes there wasn't much of a chance. Plus, that we had to pass close to Malta, and Malta had a very good base there for their Bristol-Blenheim airplanes. And what they did is when they attacked us at sea, they were going out. I have to mention that we did have anti-aircraft on board, usually one on the stern, one on the bow. But when an airplane came very low, like something like 100 or 200 feet above the water, and then pulled up at the last moment, sometimes they even took our antenna away, you could not reach them with our guns. They were too low. The guns didn't go that low. So that's why many of them just got away. So I did that for 1940, 41, and 42. In the beginning of, let me see, when we were starting to prepare the ships for troop transports in ports like Geneva and Trieste and Venice. At that time, Rommel wasn't in Africa yet. He came about 3 months later. And then we started with equipment such as Volkswagen, very light tanks, and we heard later on that, for example, the Volkswagen were built up with plywood to look like tanks. And Rommel sometimes used them to run up and down the horizon to let the British show that there were German tanks involved. By then, we didn't have tanks in Africa yet. And so we went up and down, north, south, and lost many of our ships. And there were some interesting things that happened that I remember. For example, at nighttime, every night at 10 o'clock, we had a German radio station out of Belgrano that was sending the Lily Marlene, sung by Lale Anderson. And so everybody was sitting on their orange crates there listening to Lily Marlene. It was kind of an Africa Corps melody. And one day, we took British prisoners from Tripoli back to Napoli. And we sat down with them and talked to them, and they were all aviators. And then somebody mentioned about the Lily Marlene. Oh no, it came on the radio. It was late at night. So that man also, his ears perked up and said, oh, that was a time when we sat down and listened at your radio station. And in fact, at 10 o'clock at night, there was no fighting going on. They both sat there and listened at the Lily Marlene. And so then sometimes I also went to Greece and Crete. We were the first supply ship going into Crete after the parachute soldiers had landed there and taken over. So after that, I tried to make it short because there's so much to talk about if you really want to. From there, I went back to the north, to the Baltic Sea, and still under Navy orders and just merchant ships. And one of the things I did was the 24th U-flotilla in Memel. They needed targets for their commanders to be trained and their future U-boat commanders. And we were the target ship. And we would go out at night and they shot torpedoes at us. But the torpedoes had lights in front. And then they put them in such a way that they went underneath the ship, supposed to. One day the torpedo went in and we just limped into port after that one. But that was one of these more interesting things. But so generally then I wound up in the Baltic in something that I will talk about on Saturday, which has to do with saving the people from the east of Germany, like East Prussia and all that, from the Russian troops that entered the beginning of 45. And we brought a total of 2.3 million people with ships to the west in 4 months. That was quite an operation. But like I said, I talk about that on Saturday. So that's about generally trying to explain the merchant marine.
Yeah, time is really advancing, and we got about 15 to 20 minutes left, so I would like to open this panel discussions for Q&A from our distinguished audience. Questions, please. Madam.
I would like to ask Mrs. Bozak if she has the same feeling that Mrs. Ringenberger had about sort of not belonging and being not a real veteran.
Would you repeat the question for
Yeah,
me,
could you please repeat the question, madam, please? Over the mic, yeah.
I would like to ask Mrs. Bozak if she has the same feeling of sort of being an outsider as far as being a veteran is concerned that Mrs. Ringenberger had.
If I have the same feelings as what? I'm a little...
Mrs. Ringenberg said that she sort of felt like an outsider and was not quite sure that she was really a veteran.
Well, I believe that you didn't get veteran status from the very beginning, right?
Right.
They didn't get, just like the merchant marines, they didn't get veteran status until just recently.
I know the Lady Marines did not either, but I believe were the WWIIs different? Did you get veteran status right away?
Well, when we first went in, when we had the auxiliary, we were not considered anything. But when General Eisenhower came in June of 1943, I have pictures of the general here reviewing our troops, some of our women. I was a member of the 149th WWII Headquarters Company, which was the first company to go overseas in World War II, and I guess that's the reason why I was invited here, which I'm glad. And so at the time we had a director, Ovita Harvey from Texas. She went over there, and we were given a choice. We were given a choice to remain there and become part of the Army, so to speak. Not like the Army of today, but our Army in those days, which was altogether different. But a lot of the women chose not to re-enlist, and they didn't want to become WAC, so they came home. But after that, we had all the benefits and privileges of the regular Army. Of course, the pay in those days, you know what it was like. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question, please. Sir.
I'd like to ask Mr. Ehlers if he could talk about the bond that existed between him and his squad mates, and if you could also mention some of the qualities of leadership that make an outstanding small unit leader.
Well, it takes a lot of training. You know, I was in the service for 2 years before the war started, so I had a lot of training before I ever became a squad leader. And of course, I didn't get any promotions until I was overseas, and I guess by demonstration I was able to show that I was a leader. But I got promoted to a corporal, and then I got promoted to a sergeant, and never at any time did I ever know when I got a certificate. I didn't know when I was promoted or what the dates were, anything like that, until I became a second lieutenant. That's the only time I ever found out what date I was really promoted. But we didn't have any leadership training other than what we had in combat there, and we got it the hard way. But leadership training is very important for anybody going into the military service. That's the reason our ROTC programs are such a good program throughout the United States, is because they teach leadership and training in that, and that's what we need. No, we in America, we weren't short leaders because we could just about count on anybody to take over if they needed to. That was one thing about American soldiers, that they were all very capable of becoming a leader.
Thank you. Question, perhaps to Mrs. Ringenberg? Sir? Oh, madam?
I don't really have a question, but as a female, I would like to say, and I'm going to compliment the females, how in awe and how much we admire you for what you did. And usually the female does not get the so-called credit. And so I just wanted to say how much we enjoyed hearing you and being here, and thank you for all that you did.
You're absolutely right, and I share that, because there's a saying that General Patton said, wars may be fought by weapons, but they're won by men, and I may add, also by women. Absolutely. We got time for another 2 or 3 questions, please.
To Captain Wiedeken, in the American Merchant Marine, when we were traveling either alone or in convoy, we used a zigzag method of traveling so that we could avoid the German submarines. Did you all use the same sort of tactics in a German Merchant Marine?
Yes, we did. Sometimes it resulted in accidents, because you know how difficult that is to navigate a ship between others that close. Plus the fact that we could not communicate by radio with each other. Radio was a no-no during the war. And so we had to signal by light, or, you know, Morse signals, or the flag signals by hand. So it wasn't, but we did sometimes, if there was enough space.
Yes, please.
If I may hear from the ladies, I know that you had mentioned this idea of, you know, Ms. Ringenberg, I think she said, you know, you could get married, you could be a nurse, you could be a teacher. After the war, with your experiences, what did you go on to do after that?
I didn't quite follow the question.
Yeah. Could you repeat the question,
Sure.
please?
Given the experiences that you had in the war, when you, I guess, sort of discovered that you could be more than a teacher, more than a waitress, what did you do with those experiences after the war? What did you go on to do?
I came back and was a flight instructor. I still have my flight instructor's rating, and I'm proud of my students that I had. It wasn't easy getting the students in the first place, but once I got them, I've got them all over the world.
Okay, I have a question for you, Ms. Ringenberg. How many hours do you have, and do you still accept students?
I do biennial flight reviews, and those that need to be upgraded on instruments or multi-engine, I have the examiner ratings on them. But I'm not actively getting in and out of an airplane is harder than flying in. I have over 40,000 hours flying time. That's a lot of sitting.
There was a question over there. Yes.
For the captain, Captain, just want to know, what did the average German mariner think of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis when you were on the high seas? Did you ever have time to think about that, sort of what he was ranting about, or just were you political folks in any way, or what do you think all that crew?
It's a good question. Generally, in the merchant marine as well as navy, there was quite a resistance to Hitler. And in fact, they have tried to get some political motivated young officers into the ships, you know, and after a while you know right away, especially if it's a small crew, who it is. He didn't stay on board very long. No, generally people were not, because it's in the nature of merchant marine. You go all over the world, you meet other people, and you come back and get into something like this where you have you're not allowed to listen even at foreign radios or something. You only are allowed to read the local newspaper, you know, made by Dr. Goebbels. And so you learn not to believe anything anymore when it gets to that. And no, we didn't have generally any problems with that.
Captain Whitekin, one quick question for you. You mentioned the 52 horses that were your cargo during the invasion of Norway. What happened to them?
We had to shoot most of them because they got hurt. I mean, you cannot, when a horse, once it is, and many of them died in the water. I mean, the holes immediately filled with water where they were down there. And some of them we got out, but they had to be shot by their attendants. Because you can't, when a horse is hurt that badly, especially when it can't stand up anymore, you have to shoot it.
I had a question for Mr. Ehlers. You had touched on the D-Day invasion and the accuracy of movies such as Saving Private Ryan. Are there aspects of that invasion that you think have never accurately been captured on film?
Well, I think they did a pretty good job of accurately capturing what was actually happening on the beach and things like this, so, except they did some over-exaggeration in some scenes, like where they showed a heck of a lot of blood in the water on the beaches, where blood doesn't stay on the beach. It washes away as soon as a wave comes in. The water goes out, and then all that stuff goes with it. So you didn't see that kind of stuff unless you happened to be there when the blood all of a sudden poured out of somebody. But otherwise, you would never see it. They did that. That's exaggeration. And Saving Private Ryan, going across the field and looking for a young man in another unit, and they're out there in no man's land and talking to one another back and forth like there was nobody around them, was a very dangerous thing to do. It's a good way to get yourself killed out in the fields. So I don't think we never went across the fields talking like that to one another. We didn't have time for we didn't want to get killed. So there were a lot of things a few things, but it was a pretty good, it's a good movie. The nice thing about Saving Private Ryan, it did show the humanitarian thing. It showed how the mothers who suffered as a result of the war. In other words, here the first scene in the movie was that this Army vehicle was coming down the road to this farmhouse, and this mother's sitting on her porch. And she finally sits down, and she knows she's going to receive bad news, but she didn't know she's going to receive bad news about losing 4 of her brothers in one accident, something like that. And that's hair-raising. And a lot of mothers went through that during World War II. My mother had 3 boys in the service. 1 got killed. She had 2 son-in-laws. They both survived. So, but it's a rough world out there for mothers who have to provide the armed forces with the soldiers and sailors and so forth that do face this battle situations like this.
Thank you. To conclude tonight's session, I have a very brief personal question to all 4 panelists. Out of your personal World War II experience, what is your personal message to the present American youth and to the world's young generations?
Well, I think it's very, very important for us to be mentors to the schools and speak at the schools, and I do probably 20 to 25 a year, because those students need to know that we had a good life and it was a good time, and they too can be part of the greatest generation if they apply themselves.
Thank you. Captain Vidikian?
I didn't think much about it because, you know, it's so long ago, but I would say I wouldn't go through that again for anything in the world. I mean, it's so senseless.
Yeah.
It just,
Thank you.
I don't know.
Yeah. Mrs. Bozak?
Well, it seems like everything I do is veteran-oriented. And doing my volunteer work for 18 years, we help the veterans. We have parties for the patients at the Miami VA General Hospital, and we try to help the veterans in every way. At the private sector, I don't think I've contributed anything to that, but when it comes to veterans, I'm right in there helping them in every way we can. That's why I guess I'm a life member, like I said, of everything.
Thank you. And Mr. Ehlers, please.
What I did since the war?
Excuse me?
You're talking about what I did since the war?
No, my personal question to you was what is your personal message to the youth out of your World War II experience?
My personal message to the unit here?
To the youth, to the younger generation.
To the youth? Oh, okay. Well, my personal message to the youth, I talk to them all the time. First of all, I worked for the Veterans Administration for 30 years, and I interviewed veterans, and I retired in 1980. Ever since that time, I've been talking to the youth of America. And my message to them is to believe in our country, and first of all, that the Constitution of the United States is the best constitutional government in the world. It's survived the longest of any government, and that it is worth saving, and that we should all work at it, and it's in their hands now. As each generation passes on, they got the responsibility of carrying that on, and I think they should really study the history of the world, and they will really find out that this is the greatest country that has ever been in existence, because we've freed more people in our short time of history than any other country in the world has.
Thank you very much. Thank you all to you. Thank you to our audiences for being with us tonight. Thank you.